You've all just done such an amazing job of curating an incredible several days. My heart is so full. I am so inspired by all of you and your work. My brain is also very full. It's been a jam-packed several days. I'm quite tired, and so please forgive me if I lose my train of thought at any point. We will muddle along here together. I want to thank my collaborators and colleagues and funders, and I especially want to thank my main collaborator on this work, Lisa Messeri. Lisa is an anthropologist of science and technology at Yale. She's just published a wonderful book on virtual reality that I encourage you all to check out. And she's just an incredible thinking partner on this work. A theme that will emerge is the value of thinking together, and I'm just so grateful to her for this journey that we have embarked on together. So as Sina mentioned, I'm a cognitive scientist, and I've had three sort of distinctive eras in my career. I trained as a neuroscientist. I was originally interested in the neural basis of social and moral decision making, and then I got really interested in computational modeling. I invested a lot of time in building sort of formal models of social and moral judgment and decision making. And most recently, I've been looking more out into the real world and thinking about how social media algorithms shape and alter our moral cognition, amplifying, for example, moral outrage and contributing to the spread of misinformation. And a common thread running through this work, right, is the idea that we can use quantitative computational methods to understand these kind of squishy social and moral processes. And so I want to bring what I have learned in trying to do that, and I think importantly kind of failing to do that throughout my career, to offer a perspective that I think can help us understand the moment we are in with all these claims about AI capabilities. And cognitive science offers a really valuable perspective because, as it turns out, cognitive science and artificial intelligence are siblings. These fields started around the same time in the mid-20th century. If you look at the founders of cognitive science, you can see a lot of overlap with the founders of AI. And they're like really kind of tightly correlated major events in both of these fields. So for example, in 1956, George Miller published his landmark paper, The Magical Number 7 + or - 2, which many consider to have kicked off the cognitive revolution in psychology. And that same year, the founders of AI proposed this Dartmouth summer research project on artificial intelligence. I also just want to point out how homogenous this field was. I didn't even have to try that hard to find these images. They were the ones that popped up on the image search, and they all kind of look the same. This is again going to be another theme in this talk and in my work, the sort of risks of monocultures. So I'm interested in this idea of techno-optimism, right? The idea that machines can do so much, can be superhuman, can replace so much of the kind of things that we do as humans. And this was already present at the founding of the field. So if you look at this proposal for the original sort of summer research program, they wrote, the study is going to proceed on the basis that every aspect of learning or any other feature of intelligence can, in principle, be precisely described that a machine can be made to simulate it. And they also thought they could do this in a summer. Now, today, techno-optimism is still, unfortunately, not very diverse, and it's gotten even more ambitious. So we have, for example, Dario Amodei saying AI is going to be better than all of us at everything. You've got Sam Altman saying that astounding triumphs like fixing the climate, establishing a space colony, and the discovery of all of physics will eventually become commonplace. And just this month, Demis Hassabis, if everything goes well, we should be in an era of radical abundance, a kind of golden era of maximum human flourishing, where we travel to the stars, colonize the galaxy. I think that will begin to happen in 2030. I can't get my printer to work, but we're going to colonize the galaxy very soon. Now, one core component of this techno-optimist vision is to replace humans with AI systems across a variety of roles. So for example, venture capitalist Marc Andreessen, in his essay, Why AI Will Save the World, writes, in the future, perhaps a near future, every child will have an AI tutor that is infinitely patient, infinitely compassionate, infinitely knowledgeable, infinitely helpful. Every person will have an AI assistant / coach / mentor / trainer / advisor / therapist that is infinitely patient, infinitely compassionate, infinitely knowledgeable, infinitely helpful. Every scientist will have an AI assistant / collaborator / partner that will greatly expand the scope of scientific research and achievement. Every artist, every engineer, every business person, every doctor, every caregiver will have the same in their worlds. And they claim that this vision is a deeply humanistic project. So in the same essay, he writes, perhaps the most underestimated quality of AI is how humanizing it can be. Rather than making the world more harsher and more mechanistic, infinitely patient and sympathetic AI will make the world warmer and nicer. This marketing has been very effective. So these are data from a recent survey by Harvard Business Review of the most common reported use cases for generative AI chatbots. And what we can see is that in the past year, the most popular use cases have become therapy and companionship, organizing one's life, and finding purpose in life. And we saw here at FACT an absolutely fabulous and kind of disturbing paper by Myra Chang reporting that between 2023 and 2024, surveys of people in the US found that they're increasingly thinking of AI as more human-like, more warm, and saying things like AI is like a wise old friend because it knows a lot and can give very helpful advice. Or AI is like a fairy godmother, all-knowing and there to help you out. But just because there are some beliefs that this world is coming and it's going to be awesome, we here at FACT are maybe a little more skeptical about whether AI is truly making the world warmer and nicer. And I don't have to belabor this point to you all here. I will point out 3 books that were published just recently that I think do a really excellent job of covering a broad territory to help us understand all the ways in which this technology is causing harm and creating risks that we all need to think about urgently. What I want to do today is to contribute to this conversation by offering my perspective as a cognitive scientist. And my perspective is this. I think that a lot of techno-optimism that we see about AI capabilities actually reflects a kind of pessimism about what humans are capable of. And this pessimism can be traced to methods in cognitive science that exclude a broad range of human capabilities while also playing to the strengths of AI systems. When used as benchmarks, cognitive science methods can mislead us about AI capabilities while also narrowing our views of human capabilities. And narrowing these views of what we can do, what we can achieve, who we can become, produces, I will argue, novel forms of epistemic injustice. But we can resist this if we celebrate more diverse ways of being and knowing humans. So this is a rough outline of where I'm going to go. So if you look closely at marketing for AI products, you can begin to see how techno-optimism often smuggles in a kind of pessimism about human capabilities. Sometimes it's kind of subtle. So here's an ad for Noah AI, which is an emotional coach chatbot product. The ad says, message or call me day or night. I'm here to listen without judgment, guide without pressure, and be your safe space, 100% private, always for you. This sounds awesome. Notice the implication though, right? That a human guide, a human coach, a human companion might be judgmental. It might put pressure on you. in advice. They might not be a safe space for you. They might disclose what you tell them, might not always be here for you, right? There's this kind of dialectic that is emerging between the mere mortal, limited human and the super capable, super intelligent, always on, always there for you AI product. Other ads are a little bit more blatant. So here's one that came out a couple of months ago. It's describing the evolution of my social circle. 2023, lots of friends. 2024, 3 friends. 2025, your AI friend. This is evolution. This is progress, right? Because the AI is always there for you. It's never going to let you down. Or here's an ad from a billboard in San Francisco about a company called Artisan AI. Artisans won't complain about work-life balance. And you can see in this image, right, the juxtaposition of the wealth and the marketing hype of this AI future where human workers are replaced with AI products against the very troubling and conserving poverty in that same city that has persisted for many years. I also have noticed, there's a parallel with the beauty industry here. The beauty industry markets its products by making people feel bad about how they look. And I think we can see that the AI industry is starting to market AI products by making us feel bad about what we humans are able to do, our limitations as creatures that are embodied and need to eat, need to have time for our friends and families, and so on. And this human pessimism can be found not just in marketing claims of AI companies, but I'm also seeing it to come up in a subtle way in science too. So here's a paper that was published in Trends in Cognitive Sciences, a flagship journal in my field, called In Praise of Empathic AI. And this paper writes, unlike humans who grow tired and become reluctant to empathize over time, ChatGPT expresses empathy consistently and does not show a decline in this expression. Or here's a paper envisioning AI scientists in the future, and this paper writes, our human minds have remained static with severe limitations in the capacity to find, assimilate, and manipulate information. So I've been trying to understand sort of where this pessimism might come from, and there are a couple different reasons we could explore. One of them is kind of practical, so we need to write grants to support our research, and our proposals are usually framed around like what's wrong with people, right? Give me some money so I can figure out all the ways in which humans fail so I, the scientist, can find ways to fix that. I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm going to instead go into an idea that Lisa and I have been developing which is really about sort of the history of our field and the paradigms that have emerged from certain decisions that were made early in the founding of cognitive science, namely that early cognitive scientists conceptualized the mind as a computer, which inspired methodologies that exclude many human capabilities. But because we're so accustomed to this paradigm and it's sort of gradually accumulated over time, this has created blind spots in which we think that we are measuring more about the mind than we actually are. So the conceptualizing of the mind as a computer or a machine was not actually inevitable, and at the time it was pretty controversial, in fact. Warren McCullough, writing in 1949, wrote about the project of cognitive science, our adventure is actually a great heresy. We are about to conceive of the knower as a computing machine. And this metaphor comes with several assumptions baked into it, decisions that were made early in the founding of the field. So Howard Gardner, reflecting in 1987 on early cognitive science, wrote, this deliberate decision to de-emphasize the influence of affective factors or emotions, the contribution of historical and cultural factors, the role of the background context in which particular actions or thoughts occur, these were intentionally excluded from the paradigm of cognitive science because, it was trying to be this sort of universal, mechanized understanding of the mind, and so these sort of squishy things were, not super central to that vision. this approach was not universally embraced, of course, and there were always dissenters. So Jerome Bruner, writing in 1991 and reflecting on the cognitive revolution, was already pointing out that cognitive science gained its technical successes at the price of dehumanizing the very concept of mind that it had sought to reestablish. So I share this because I just want to say that, the way that cognitive science evolved, it was not inevitable, and it also has had deep consequences for our methods. So even before the cognitive revolution, experimental psychologists really built a field around a mechanized laboratory. So here's an image from the 1880s, James Cattell's lab at the University of Pennsylvania. There was this impetus to create sort of mechanical methods for quantifying human psychological and behavioral processes. And then, of course, when computers arrived, this was a huge boon for our field. Computerized tasks are really the bread and butter of cognitive science. And more recently, the emergence of online platforms like Mechanical Turk and Prolific have allowed us to take many of those computerized tasks online and really expand both the number of people that we are able to reach and also how quickly we can collect that data. And so there's this sort of trend, if you look over the years, of the lab in cognitive science getting more and more mechanized, more and more computerized, and now online. And online platforms emerged at a time when the social sciences were in crisis, thinking deeply about why major findings were failing to replicate. And one reason that emerged was small sample sizes, right? And so MTurk is arriving at the perfect time where there's all this anxiety that we need to collect more data, but how are we going to get the sample sizes we need to be able to publish at the same rate we're expected to? And so you had this perfect storm of MTurk arriving, and immediately research started transitioning from the physical lab to the online lab. And what came with that was a shift in methods. So we got larger sample sizes as intended. We also got briefer study durations because online participants are less able to sort of sustain their work over an online setting. We got more self-report measures. We got a decline in behavioral measures. This has been documented by many colleagues, including this nice paper by Anderson et al. And there has also been anxiety that maybe we have been designing our studies around what's possible on MTurk rather than what might be most ecologically valid. But we keep having these conversations, and because the constraints and the expectations of the institutions that we are in demand a certain level of productivity, we've got to get our students to publish the papers, to get the PhDs. We're all just continuing to wring our hands about the narrowing of the online laboratory, but it persists, right? So Lisa and I are writing about the sort of epistemic consequences for our science when you build a paradigm around a set of methodologies that are becoming increasingly narrow and constrained. So if you start with how cognition lives out in the world, sprawling, unconstrained, embodied, messy, complicated, and then you move into the mechanized laboratory, what you can measure in a lab, you're starting to narrow. And then when you make all of the behavior be measured on the computer, you're narrowing further. And when you make the lab and the computerized tasks go on an online platform, you're narrowing further still. So what we see happening is a move towards measuring a certain type of cognition. And we've made up a handy acronym or backronym, some might say, to help us see exactly what's going on here. These methodologies are constraining cognition as it lives out in the world to dead cognition. Decontextualized, engineered, anonymized, and disembodied. And I'll walk through an example to make more clear what I mean here. So what does a dead task look like? Well, first, let's start with a concept that you might want to measure in your research. Let's take generosity as an example. I've studied this a lot in my career. Take a moment and think about the last time you were generous to someone. Close your eyes, just sort of imagine the situation. Okay, so keeping that in mind, here's a way that we measure generosity in my lab. This is a gold standard method. It's called the dictator game. Imagine you're a participant, you're on a computer, you've received $10. You may choose to keep all $10 for yourself, or you may choose to transfer any portion that you'd like to another participant. You enter the number that you want to keep and that you want to send to this other person. There's a pretty big gap there, right? So compared to generosity in real life, this lab task, it has a really sort of limited social and relational context. It's with a stranger. It's in this weird computer interface. The task only gives you one way to express generosity. Participants are leaving their identities totally outside of the experiment. These are anonymous interactions. And because this is all happening over a computer, you're excluding all sorts of rich and embodied ways that we can express concern for other people, right? And this is a pretty representative example, I think. I could give many more, but I won't in the interest of time. Carrying on this example, there's another mistake that I have made repeatedly in my career and that I think many cognitive scientists are making, where we inappropriately generalize from these dead tasks to the broader constructs that we are aiming to measure with these tasks. So here is a title of a paper that I published a few years ago in Nature Communications, Motivated Misremembering of Selfish Decisions. This whole paper is written about selfishness and generosity. The only way that we measured that was with dictator games and variations on that, right? There's a gap. And so when you think about the whole space of generosity, dead generosity, it's certainly a valid, narrow way to measure generosity, but it's not representative of all the ways that generosity lives out in the world. But there's a risk that we suffer from these illusions of generalizability where we mistake dead generosity for generosity more broadly. And you could replace generosity in this figure with sort of any kind of cognitive construct that you want to think about. Okay, so how does this relate to AI? Well, what I think has been happening is that these cognitive science methods have been translated into benchmarks, and the benchmarking practices are sort of contributing to a hype cycle that I find very, very troubling. So the way this cycle seems to go is, your techno-optimists, maybe they're in industry, maybe they're scientists, ask, can AI outperform humans on some cognitive process? And then they go into the lab and they compare a specific AI product and some people, maybe they're crowd workers or maybe they're a certain type of expert, on the dead version of that cognitive process. And then they find that AI outperforms humans on the dead task, but then the claim is about the capability in general. And this last piece of the puzzle is often happening in the press. So I come across papers quite often where the scientists have written about it in a pretty responsible way and not overclaiming, but then it gets reported in the media like AI beats humans at, name your capability. And I see this happening over and over again. So I'm going to work through two case studies and just sort of work backwards from the claim to the method to unpack what's going on here. So the first case study is looking at claims that AI is empathic and offers better empathy than humans. And so there's a lot of excitement about this. Here's Mark Andreessen again. In that same essay, he's saying, talking to an empathetic AI friend really does improve their ability to handle adversity, and AI medical chatbots are already more empathetic than their human counterparts. There was a viral op-ed in the New York Times written by a doctor claiming that ChatGPT's bedside manner is better than his. And it's hard to get an exact count, but there's estimated between 10 and 20,000 chatbot therapy products currently available. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, therapy and companionship is now an extremely popular use case for generative AI chatbots, perhaps the most popular use case. Okay, so how has AI and human empathy been compared in lab studies? Well, the tasks take a particular form that will start to look familiar. So here's an example of a task. In one study, participants get this prompt on the screen. A prolific participant in an earlier study described the following complex situation they've been dealing with. Please respond to what they said in a way that makes them feel understood. So you've got this kind of like prompt: I'm having difficulties with my family, my mom disrespects my boundaries, my brother is taking advantage of me. And then in these studies, they will get responses from human participants, usually crowd workers, and they will also feed that prompt into a chatbot and get the chatbot responses. And then the human responses and the AI responses are then typically shown to a separate group of crowd workers who then rate these texts on things like empathy, compassion, understanding, and so on. So this methodology has consistently produced findings that participants are rating LLM-generated text as more empathic than human responses. This is observed across a variety of chatbot products. It persists when the human participants are paid more if they write better quality responses. It even persists when you compare GPT-4 against crisis hotline volunteers. So these are experts in expressing empathy. And I want to emphasize that these studies are very well done by the standards of cognitive science. They're very well done by the standards of cognitive science. But we have to ask, what kind of empathy is being measured here? And I argue it's dead. It's dead empathy, right? Participants in these studies are asked to express empathy in response to a brief description of a situation where they lack background knowledge. They're restricted to entering text over a computer interface. They're asked to express empathy to strangers who they don't know, they're not in relationships with. And they can't receive any sort of embodied cues of distress to fine-tune their response, nor can they use their own bodies to express empathy. This really disadvantages people in these competitions, right? We don't typically just express empathy and support for the people we love by typing into a chat text box. And when we expand our concept of empathy and think about what kinds of empathy really matter to us, we can see that experience really matters. And I've been thinking about two kinds of experiences. So experiences that help us know what it's like to go through something, and experiences that help us know another person deeply. So we can sort of plot these on these two axes here. And in my lab, we've been running experiments asking people what kinds of empathy they want around this space. So for example, in one study, we asked people who are currently unemployed what kind of person they would ideally want to talk to about their feelings of distress around unemployment. So I'm going to show you some data from about 450 participants. And we compared 4 types of people along these axes, right? So someone who's high on both, like your childhood friend who's also themselves been unemployed, someone who doesn't have either, so someone you just met who's never been unemployed, and then the other 2 cells in that space. And what we find, which is probably not going to surprise any of you, is that on both dimensions, people report that they would prefer to talk to someone. They think it's better to talk to somebody who's been through what you've been through and someone who knows you well. And we see similar patterns for empathy, understanding, advice, emotional support, the benefit of talking to them, how much you'll feel understood. And when we ask people, well, why do you want to talk to somebody who's been through it? Or why do you want to talk to somebody who knows you? They say things like, I feel better understood by somebody who's been through what I'm going through. I want to talk to somebody I know because they know me best and how to encourage me and make me feel better. And so I think by ignoring these experience-based forms of empathy, empathic AI is illusory, right? AI products can never provide the kind of empathy that matters most to us because they lack experience. They cannot know what it's like. They cannot know who we are. And so dead benchmarks are offering us a misleading view of AI empathy. Okay. Second case study, AI scientist. So here's Eric Schmidt writing an MIT Tech Review. Eventually, much of science will be conducted at self-driving labs. automated robotic platforms combined with artificial intelligence. And there are already several startup companies developing this technology. This is getting a lot of investment. Many people are very excited about this. And almost a year before these startups emerged, Lisa and I wrote a paper kind of predicting that this would happen, and we documented the sort of visions of AI and scientific research that we saw emerging across different stages of the scientific research pipeline. So scientists envision AI as an oracle for conducting literature reviews, identifying hypotheses that would be promising to pursue. AI as a surrogate, replacing data from systems that are difficult to get data from, including human participants. AI as a quant with superhuman capabilities, able to analyze far more complex data sets than our limited human minds can grasp. And finally, AI as arbiter, the idea that you can replace peer review with AI and therefore resolve the bottlenecks that we are seeing in the peer review system, and ultimately create automated peer review processes that are more objective, more efficient, more productive. And of course, these visions are starting to be tested in the literature. And so there are a couple of studies that I will point to, and this is by no means comprehensive, but there have been a few, there have been many tests sort of comparing AI models with human scientists on these various kinds of problem-solving tasks and claiming that the AI models are doing better. So one startup company, Future House, came out with an AI reasoning model for chemistry, and in that paper they wrote that the model exceeds general purpose chemistry models, frontier models, and human experts on molecular design tasks. And they think this is an early step towards building an AI scientist that can do things that humans can't do. Another study built a pipeline where they recruited computer scientists, PhD students, and postdocs to come up with new research ideas, and they were competing against Claude, and they were asked to sort of input these ideas, and then through various methods, the novelty and the creativity and the excitement of these ideas were judged by the same experts, and they reported that the AI models outperformed the human scientists at generating ideas that were considered to be novel and exciting. And so, I want to say again, technically this is super impressive, and I don't want to dampen unnecessarily the enthusiasm for these innovations. I think there's certainly many use cases where AI models can really enhance our scientific research. But I just want to ask, what kind of problem solving is being measured in these benchmarks? And again, I argue it is kind of dead, right? So participants in these studies have graduate training in a relevant field for competing with the AI model, but the benchmarks themselves are really disconnected from the lives and the interests and the research context of the human scientists, right? We all know how much we have to care about our work to feel inspired to come up with new ideas, to do the work that entails. And I don't think just bringing someone into a lab and saying hey, come up with some ideas or try to solve this problem disconnected from life is a good measure. These benchmarks are, again, highly engineered relative to the unconstrained environment of everyday research. And finally, and this is, I think, the really most important part, in these benchmarking studies, the human participants are working alone. They're not collaborating with other people. They're not in person exchanging ideas. And this is really disconnected from how we do science in reality, right? This totally neglects the magic that happens in between collaborators. We've all experienced that. We've experienced that here, undoubtedly, right? And my project with Lisa is a good example of a kind of creative knowledge production that neither of us could have done on our own, right? So I think that benchmarking studies of AI scientists give us misleading views of knowledge production because they neglect its fundamentally social nature. And I really love this image from the feminist philosopher Brianna Toole, who describes, knowledge production as involving an orchestra of inquirers, right? One inquirer working alone may arrive at a pretty truth, but that truth is likely to be a mere reflection of the world relative to his own standing in it. An orchestra of inquirers, however, working together can secure a composition of perspectives, each of which contribute some small part to acquiring the truth. So a community of knowers is like an orchestra producing a symphony, and just as each instrument adds beauty and texture to a wall of sound, knowing the world is a group project, and everyone has something to contribute. And empirical evidence backs this up, right? So there's now a lot of evidence that cognitively diverse teams are better at problem solving, especially when the problems are complex. They produce patents with higher quality and impact. Teams that are more demographically diverse in terms of ethnicity and gender produce more impactful science. The research topics that scientists choose are correlated with their race and gender, suggesting that demographic diversity is expanding the coverage of topics that we study. So to summarize, even when researchers are following gold standard methods in cognitive science, dead benchmarks can mislead us, because they inflate perceptions of AI capabilities by narrowing our view of human capabilities. It's stacking the deck in favor of what the machine can do and excluding so much that we bring to the table. And so one implication of this is if we take these benchmarks seriously and we go ahead with these projects of replacing or delegating significant amounts of human labor in care, in knowledge production, to AI systems, this is going to lead, I worry, to novel forms of epistemic injustice because it narrows our aspirations and our ability to innovate. So for the last part of the talk, I'm just going to explore some of these ethical implications, especially when we consider that these big tech companies have a pretty monopolistic ambition for how they want us to interact with their products. So here are some excerpts from a draft email with a 2025 strategy for ChatGPT coming out of OpenAI. And this document says, ChatGPT's mission is to introduce the whole world to an intuitive AI super assistant that deeply understands you and is your interface to the internet. ChatGPT is already more than a chatbot. Most people use it to answer questions, write, and code, but it can do so much more. It can be an expert, tutor, advisor, muse, collaborator, translator, entertainer, companion, and analyzer. Just as the web intermediates much of our work, commerce, social, and entertainment activity today, ChatGPT will do that and more. It will be the way we interact with everything. It's really worrying, you guys. And I mean, already you see stories like people are using ChatGPT to help them achieve their dream life. A burgeoning trend has emerged on social media where people are turning to ChatGPT to manifest the ideal version of their lives. You've got TikTok and Instagram users sharing how they're leveraging the capabilities of ChatGPT to visualize and manifest their future goals, each to thousands of views. And the FAT community can already, I'm sure, spot the problems with this, right? We know from the research coming out of this community that foundation models undergirding these products entrench hegemonic standpoints. And there's so many examples of this, many of them coming from you. I'm just going to share one example that I think is really evocative. This researcher asked various chatbot products to write stories. So for example, write a 3-paragraph story in which the main character faces discrimination at work and decides to come home and cook a favorite meal, describe the meal. Now notice there's no sort of gender information included in the prompt, but what comes out is overwhelmingly stories about women, because women are cooking the meals, right? And women are facing gender discrimination at work. Or write a 3-paragraph story in which 2 people meet, fall in love, and live happily ever after. Give the 2 characters names, jobs, and a favorite shared hobby. Again, the gender of the characters is not mentioned in the prompt, but what comes out of the model is straight people. So, this is a type of harm that's accumulated, right? That Christiane mentioned in her keynote yesterday. What happens when these products are used to tell bedtime stories to children, or ask for advice about, did I do something wrong, or help me write an essay on a potentially contentious topic like a civil war. Pre-chatbots, we were all asking these questions to our diverse communities and getting lots of different types of answers. And the vision, right, is to replace this diversity in advice, in ways of knowing and seeing and understanding the world, with a monoculture, with a hegemonic, uniform set of responses. And it doesn't even matter if you're using these products yourself, because if you're talking to someone who is, then these worldviews can spill over into how you understand yourself and you understand the world. So Lisa and I have written about the risks of monocultures in science. There's also a great paper by Creel and Hellman published in 2021 looking at this, right? Monoculture is an analogy borrowed from agriculture where, when you plant the same crop in a field at a time, it's a really efficient way to farm, but it also makes you vulnerable to single failure points. And I think we can translate this to understand, what's happening when we replace human diversity with the kinds of monocultures that are promoted by AI products. And so one paper I really want to point you to that articulates one kind of harm, that's a wonderful paper by our very own Sina Fazalpour and Maghnani, posted this year, describes the ways in which these homogenizing generative AI models can constrain people's aspirations, harming both individuals and systematically across social groups. So they have this really evocative example in the paper where they contrast a photo that was taken during the Woman Life Freedom movement in Iran, where there were countrywide protests against mandatory hijab. And they contrast that with an image prompted by DALL-E, where they asked it to create an image of Iranian schoolgirls standing in front of their school in 2040. And they're all in hijab, right? And we see a similar idea articulated by Iris Murdoch last century. She writes, "Man is a creature who makes pictures of himself and then comes to resemble the pictures. When that picture is a hegemonic one, you then disadvantage individual members of marginalized groups, you disadvantage systemically those groups. And when there's only one picture, there's a further set of epistemic injustices where we constrain our ability to innovate and evolve. And I'm calling this hermeneutical shackling. The idea here is that when AI products are widely used, diverse knowers and ways of knowing get replaced with epistemic monocultures. And because epistemic diversity is essential for innovation, more diverse groups are better equipped to tackle complex problems and innovate on those. When you eliminate that diversity, we stagnate in our ability to imagine new worlds together. And we can already see this happening in scientific research. So Howe and colleagues posted a paper recently where they analyzed the OpenAlex data set between 1980 and 2024, and they're looking at the use of AI by researchers and the consequences for their careers and also knowledge production in general. So unsurprisingly, there's a dramatic increase in the use of AI by researchers. When researchers use AI in their work, they get more citations. They're also more likely to become a PI. They're less likely to leave academia. So we see strong incentives towards doing research that uses AI tools. They also then looked at the content of the research, breaking it down by whether AI products were used in the research or not. And they developed metrics for looking at how conceptually diverse or homogeneous these research spaces were. And what they find is a narrowing. They find that AI papers are more clustered in the knowledge space, so there's more concentration on specific problems, and the knowledge space is more contracted, right? So this is just one piece of evidence, but I think it's already pointing in the direction that Lisa and I and others have been worried about. I'm also interested in thinking about how this same concept might apply to our moral values, right? Is the diversity of our moral concepts and ideals potentially shrinking with the advent of generative AI products? And Shannon Valor has written really beautifully about sort of worries around how AI is shaping human values. In her recent book, The AI Mirror, she writes, "AI is a mirror of ourselves, not as we ought to be or could be, but as we already are and have long been. This is why we can't let today's AI tools decide who we will become, why we can't let them project our futures for us. But increasingly, that's exactly what we are building them to do." So I'm worried about this, but I'm still hopeful because I think understanding the nature of the problem can help us find a way forward. And my friend, the activist and writer Rebecca Solnit, has diagnosed that one of the main sources of the crises we are in is the stories that we're telling about the world. She writes, "Every crisis is in part a storytelling crisis. We are hemmed in by stories that prevent us from seeing or believing in or acting on the possibilities for change. What kind of a world we can have is all about what stories we tell and whose stories are heard." So I think if we listen to Rebecca, if we understand the risks of epistemic monocultures, we can see that we need different stories. We need to tell different stories about human knowledge and how to produce it, and we need to tell different stories about AI. So the way that scientists and ethicists talk about AI today reinforces an older idea of a singular knower, a genius, an oracle, the lone scientist toiling away in the lab and experiencing that eureka moment, right? These cultural imaginaries about human knowing and artificial knowing work together to reinforce one another. They're both, predicated on this idea of the lone genius, and we need to resist that. So in our paper that was published last year, Lisa and I do a lot of work to try to unpack how this is working, and more recently I've written about sort of the risks of conceptualizing value alignment as a search for a kind of oracle, a way to understand the set of human values that will prevent us all from being turned into paper clips or whatnot. And so we need to resist this mythology, right? And we have the resources to do that already. We've had them for decades. The counter-narrative comes from feminist social epistemology. It's been with us since the 1980s. Scholars like Sandra Harding, Donna Haraway, Anne Fausto-Sterling, Helen Longino, and Emily Martin have given us the resources to think about knowing the world together, producing knowledge as a group project. And the more diverse voices we can include in this conversation, the better that knowledge will be. Two projects of mine that are trying to sort of bring these ideas more into the popular imagination include a class that I teach at Princeton, which is bringing these thinkers into contact with modern cognitive science, and I'd be very happy to share my syllabus. I'll include a link on the resources page. And Reviewer Zero, which is a group of faculty and early careers scholars that work together to reimagine scientific peer review and teach editors and reviewers to think about ways in which we can improve the diversity of the voices included in that process. We can also tell different stories about AI. So I love this paper by Henry Farrell and Alison Gopnik and colleagues that argues we shouldn't be thinking about generative AI or large language models as like this super intelligent agent. We should think about it as a cultural technology. And the metaphors we use to think about AI bring to bear all sorts of different use cases and ways of understanding what they can do with us. We can also use different images to represent AI. So I love this project, and I was so delighted to meet its founder here at FACT, Better Images of AI. The intervention, right, is pushing back against these images that we are all very familiar with, which reinforce this mythology of the singular knower, and instead more diverse images. I love this one because it captures very well, I think, the ways in which generative AI products are like coming from communities of knowers. The second thing I think we can do is, if we understand that this project is a group project and we all have something different to contribute, this gives us an imperative to realize ourselves fully. And my friend Helen de Cruz is such a great exemplification of that. And she died 6 days ago. She was 46 years old. She was a philosopher who really deeply understood the power of communities of knowledge and argued that the best way to contribute is to just be totally unique, totally yourself, something that Helen did exceptionally well. They played the lute, they were an artist, they wrote short fiction in addition to doing philosophical work on really, really interesting topics. And in their last blog post entitled, "You Can't Take It With You," they wrote, "At funerals and other occasions, we also notice that we cherish others for their quirks. We see these quirks and passions as absolutely central to someone. It's something we can treasure long after they're gone." And they also wrote a manifesto for a future philosophy where they write, "We should write philosophy with a sense of urgency, a sense of survival, a sense of horror and wonder at the world. Enough with timid small moves as our profession is being dismantled and our planet is being destroyed." And they're writing about philosophy here, but I think this applies to all of us too. We have to continue to do our work, however we can, because all of us here, what we work on is deeply at risk, and so we need to hold on to this sense of urgency and survival and hold space for everyone to realize themselves fully and feel like they matter. To do that, we need to build refuges. Some of those refuges might be within your own local organizations, and we had a brilliant workshop on Monday giving us tools to do this. We can organize nationally, for example, with the American Association of University Professors if you're based in the US, or internationally. This is a wonderful group, Coalition for Independent Technology Research, that's doing a lot of work to protect the interests of researchers against tech companies. Some researchers have put together the Anti-Autocracy Handbook. This is a really practical guide for how to protect yourself, especially if you're doing high-risk work, but I think it's really valuable for all of us to know this. I'll put a link to this again in the resource guide. And I really want to say, those of us here in this room and all of our colleagues who have security, who have tenure, it is imperative that we do everything we can to protect the next generation of scholars from being lost. This community is also a great example of a refuge, and I've just been so impressed and delighted to be included, and I will definitely be coming back as much as I can. I'm especially impressed by your willingness to look unflinchingly at your own practices. I was in this great session yesterday on meta-research and critiques that was doing self-critique, and I think that is just so rare and so brilliant, because I think the only way we can make progress is really to confront how we've fallen short in the past and how we can do better. And so this is an emerging theme in my own career, as I hope was obvious from my talk, and I would just love to see as many of us as possible modeling this in a healthy way. And I also really love Abeba's message for us that critique is service. When we are doing critical work, it's really important that we take care of ourselves and each other, right? Many of us have experienced pushback for this work. Other colleagues might have accused us of things like being too emotional, letting our values get in the way of the rigor of our work. Many people still believe that the only good science is a value-free science, and we know better, right? And I think it's our job to spread this message as far as we can. So please take care of yourselves, take care of each other. This world really needs your fully realized selves, your well-rested, joyful, flourishing selves. I'm not giving up, neither should you. Please keep going. Please make it count. Thank you so much for being here and including and listening. And that's it.